is anxiously awaiting the answer to what happens when we die.
Oh yeah, and Rabbi Rheins has the answer.
Yes.
I don't have the answer. I have what reform.
Yeah, I'm going to use it.
You have to try with our listening as well.
Okay, thank you all for coming, and welcome to our third of a three-part lecture on Messianic views and the world to come from a Jewish perspective across the streams. Now, I'm just going to repeat it again. Judaism focuses on what we do while we're here, not so much the afterlife, but that's not to say there's nothing written about a Messianic age or a Messiah, Mashiach, or a world to come. So this evening, we are delighted to have with us Rabbi Samuel Rheins, who will present the Reform Movement's view. Rabbi Rheins recently moved to Houston. Welcome. The rodeo is coming soon. To become the new assistant rabbi at Congregation Beth Israel. Growing up in Denver, where both his parents are Reform rabbis, he graduated from the University of Colorado at Boulder with a major in history and a minor in Jewish studies. After college, he spent a year studying at Pardes, Institute for Jewish Education in Jerusalem, before entering HUC JIR in Jerusalem and Cincinnati, and he was ordained in 2024. Rabbi Rheins enjoys teaching Torah to all ages, engaging with children, and sharing the joys of Judaism. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Rheins.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. So tonight we are going to talk about the afterlife. And as Gail said, Judaism focuses on the here and now, on this world. We don't need to repeat ourselves so much about it. But yet the afterlife, Olam Habah, and the other part of the title I left off, the Messianic age, is certainly a great part of Jewish tradition. And tonight we're going to talk about the Reform perspective, or the Reform perspectives, because it certainly has changed over time. So if you were going to ask the average Reform Jew, tell me exactly what you believe about Olam Habah, the answer would probably be yes. Not really able to specify. And I would wager a bet that if you ask most Jews, and I consider, across the spectrum, if you ask the questions, do you believe in Olam Habah or some sort of afterlife, they'll probably say, yeah. Well, what does that look like? And exactly what orders does that look like? And what is the Messianic age? And what's the word? You can go through the list and people go, well, listen, I don't really know. But, there's this belief in something, even though sometimes it can be hard to articulate. So tonight we're going to go through a little bit of the history of how the Reform movement has focused on the afterlife with a little bit of a history of thought. So to do this from the start, we're going to look back at what some of the founding rabbis of Reform Judaism thought, some of the debates they had about how to relate to Olam Habah, the Messianic age, and all of these things. And then we'll see how it steadily changed over time and the trajectory of where Reform Judaism is going. So a little bit of background before we get to the slides, and that Reform Judaism was really created in the early 1800s. This is when it started to really blossom. And the founding of it was in Germany. And Reform Judaism was extremely influenced and is influenced by the European Enlightenment, this approach to rationality. We're going to do away with some old systems, and we want to focus on science and rationality and logic and seeing the world, observing it, and then making rational inquiries on there. And certain things like Olam Habah, certain mystical tendencies, kind of went by the wayside in Reform Judaism early. And there are debates about this, of what are we doing with all of these mystical and esoteric things? No, we have to focus on practicality. One of the other focuses of Reform Judaism was really to be able to assimilate to the culture that you're in while still maintaining your Jewish identity. And so there's an old saying that Reform Judaism was the thing that caused the most Jews to assimilate and what stopped the most Jews from assimilating too. And so in the European Enlightenment, when There were new notions of what it meant to be a citizen, that anyone could be a German, anyone could be French, anyone could be English, you can all integrate. And so we can throw away these traditions of the past and really be true French citizens, be true German citizens, and fit into that populace. And having notions about wanting to return to a land of Israel, wanting to establish another nation, a nation that's just for Jews, in theory could have hurt these ideas of, well, we want to be good German citizens, and yet we keep talking about Lishna Habah Yeshurun. We keep talking about next year in Jerusalem, which is a part of this messianic vision of returning to Jerusalem. And so the early reformers were struggling with, well, how do we still be Jewish? How do we still integrate into the society we're in, and how do we go from there? So before we see some of what they talked about, questions or clarifications? Okay, so the next few slides, I have excerpts from a book called The Rise of Reform Judaism by Rabbi Walter Gunther Plaut, where he samples some of the essays from some of the early Reform rabbis, and you get to see what they think. So let's start off with that. Sorry. Okay. So the first essay is from a rabbi called Aaron Heron, and he says, for a long time now, I have noticed with regret the sad situation of my coreligionists. Some of these words are like 300 years old, and so they're good Scrabble words too. A portion of them have surrendered to superstition, another to unbelief. And so some are totally losing faith, and others are becoming way too superstitious, way too mystical. Well, that harmful conglomeration of pious simulators, the Hasidim, spreads more and more daily with new supporters. Another group eschews all religious obligations and declares as true only that which the senses can witness. So he's saying, as we have this rise of the Hasidim, this more mystical sect of Jews who rely a lot more on the Zohar for inspiration, this rabbi is saying, enough of that, enough of this mysticism. We want to go through science and things that we can observe. That's more what we're interested in believing. So let's see how he looks to accomplish this goal. So he says, in order to do this, we need to cleanse our liturgy from later addition. Heaven only knows when and by whom they were added, and to restore it to its pristine simplicity. So all of these extra psalms, all of these references to Zohar and mysticism that in his mind plagued the prayer book, we're done with. We're going for the pure and for the simple, and we're going to even continue to redact it. The next point, to say one's prayers in the understandable language of one's country, so that the heart of the worshiper may know what the lips speak. So he wants to pray in the vernacular, fine. To hold a service to the accompaniment of an organ, so that harmony and order, which are now lacking in synagogues, might be reintroduced. So this is not only an aesthetic thing, it's also a symbol to the neighbors in Protestant Germany. Look, we're not Jews shuckling back and forth during the Shemona Esrei. We're dignified. We have musical notes. We have these sheets. It's just trying to fit in. And four, or whether such changes are prohibited because the customs of Israel have the force of Torah, which therefore may not be altered. So he's challenging this idea that parts of the religion can change. So early on, and of course there's more to this, but there's these pushes to change the Reform liturgy, and we'll look at some of the Reform liturgy a little bit later on. Questions before we continue? Great. So next we have another introduction by the editor of the book, Gunther Plaut, and he summarizes the nature of the Jewish people, dispersion and restoration. And he says, it was in the nature of reform as a child of the Enlightenment and the 19th century idealism to be strongly universic in its religious emphasis. So the idea to downplay the particularistic notions. So instead of saying we're this nation that really belongs in Eretz Yisrael, our holy land somewhere else, really when we talk about redemption, let's lift up all of humanity with the Jews too. So it's this kind of melding of ideas. Israel was a people to be sure, but it was not a nation like Germany or England. Jews were eager to eschew all dual loyalties to profess their respective patriotism. So we're going to deal away with Israel. We want to be good patriots because, and they really believe this in their essays, the age of anti-Semitism is done. And we read it now. When you're reading over the essays, you start thinking, oh, poor you. You don't know what's going to happen 100 years later, or 150 years later, whenever, after the First World War, then the Second World War. There's this idea that we're done with the ways of the past and we can assimilate. He continues, prayers for the restoration of or return to the land of Israel seemed therefore out of place, which is of course a great notion of the Messianic age. There was a straight line that led from early anti-nationalism to later anti-Zionism. But there remained within Reform also a keen sense of Jewish peoplehood and Jewish needs. So just because the early Zionist movement wasn't so popular, there still were the essence of Jewish peoplehood that continue to have its threads. And so even though there was large tendencies and pushes to do away with it, as Plaut is noting, there was something about the essence of the religion, there was something about the essence of peoplehood that you really couldn't get rid of. That change as you might, it's going to stick around because it's really the essence of what it means to be Jewish. This made possible the identification of other reformers with Zionism and the eventual reintegration of the concept and the restoration and the philosophic structure of the movement. So in time, they were able to become Zionist. Questions before we keep moving on from thinker to thinker to thinker? Okay? I love questions, so please feel free to ask anytime. This is all early to mid 1800s. And they're trying to figure out really what this movement can be about, where they still have a lot of influence and sway. And also at this time, it's not like there was the Union of Reformed Judaism. Within different cities in Germany, different congregations were more progressive, less progressive, had more tradition, had less tradition. So they're trying to figure out, how do we do reform? How do we do this? So now we have an essay, The Jewish People. With the dispersion of Jews into all parts of the world, and with the loss of independence and homeland, our people stand anew on a political road. Once more, they were thrown back into an antisocial condition. There were once again formless, non-organic, anto-mystic mass that had to start once again from the bottom. For unnumbered Jews had once again been sold as slaves. It was once again became necessary to rise from the lowest rung of society to the civil level. But now it was a new world into which they entered. Their task was different. So there's some ideas that the new Jewish task, we're into this new age, this new golden age where Jews can be accepted. Formerly, they had striven to create a new nation, that being Israel, an independent state. But now their goal was to join other nations and reach for the highest rung in development and human society. It was the task of a new age to form a general human society which would encompass all people organically. In the same way, it was the task of the Jews not to create their own nation and their own separate political entity, but rather to obtain from the other nations full acceptance into their society and thereby attain to participation in the general body of society. So there's this, reinforcing this point that what's going to really redeem Jews now is redeeming all of humanity. We have some essays addressing the concept of the Messiah, and again we have Plaut to set the context. At first, the traditional Jewish idea of a personal Messiah continued as an integral element of Reformed teaching. In time, most reformers gave up the concept of a personal Messiah. Instead, they believed in a messianic age which mankind itself would achieve by its forward development. The Messiah might never come, but Israel would soon lead all men into this blessed era. So not giving up on the messianic dreams, just changing it. And here we have Moses Gutman, who hopefully will turn all of this on his head. And again, this is all early 1800s. And so, as regard to the third point in your statement, so he's referring to other essays, concerning the expectation of a Messiah and the hope of return to Palestine, there is good reason to assume that such a belief exists but in the heart of very few Israelites. That is the faith and hope that someday God will send a special person who will lead the Israelites back to Palestine, there to build an independent state of their own. So he's saying very few Jews really in their heart believe that this Messiah is coming. The majority of you recognize no other fatherland than the country to which you belong by birth and civil circumstance. But even the manner in which you treat and dismiss this article in your explanation illustrates quite clearly your negative attitude. Thus, your intended reform could not be called anything but an undermining of the honored edifice of the Mosaic religion. To be sure, we too neither expect nor do we wish for a Messiah to lead us back to Palestine. However, the promise of a Messiah, a Redeemer from bodily suffering and spiritual slavery, this concept runs like a thread through all the holy books of our scriptures. It carries with it our most glorious and cherished hopes, and we shall not permit any decree to rob us of the sacred belief. It is woven into the inner fabric of our faith, and our religion would lose its supreme ornament if these hopes were to be torn from us. As much as any other belief or teaching, the messianic promises have their firm foundation in the revealed word of God himself, and every Orthodox Israelite feels obligated to live or die by it. So why is this last slide important? Because he's saying all of your points are correct. You know, very few Jews at this time, he's saying reforms, believe that there's really going to be a Messiah. But if we totally get rid of it from our religion, well, we can't do that. And so on the one hand, you have people fighting to totally rid the early Reform prayers and religion of anything associated with Olam Habah, Messianic age, Messiah, and yet you can't get rid of it. And so how are you going to adapt it? How are you going to pray for it? Before we go and look at some of the evolution of the prayers, questions about the context in which some of the early Reform prayers were edited. That's a great question. So some of it, what they would go back and they would look at sources like the Mishnah and Talmud, wherein it says, here's the order of the service. You know, you have 2 blessings before the Shema ve'ahavta, 1 blessing in the morning, 2 blessings in the evening. And all the other piyutim, any other introductions, you can get rid of. Here's the Amidah, you can have this, but all of these prayers and supplications at the end, which aren't a part of this original service, we're gonna do away with. Part of the stuff that they did away with had to do with straight ideology. If we don't believe in this anymore, we're going to get rid of it. Other parts of it were simply to save time. Like the full morning service, if you do it with full kavanah, if you do it with full intention from start to finish, it's a long service. And so part of it was also time as well that they chose to edit stuff out of the prayer book as well. So that is part of it. I'm not sure I fully understand the question you're asking. Where do they get the messianic references from? That's a great question. So within the Hebrew Bible itself, Olam Habah, the messianic age, isn't for the most part talked about directly, but certainly the rabbis of the Talmud and of later generations talk about it quite extensively. And again, there aren't totally unified ideas of exactly what's going to happen, but there's a general idea that somehow when we die, our souls, our neshama, will return back to God. So that our souls started with God, will come back to us, and then we'll go to God again. And then various rabbis have different ideas about what Olam Habah will really be and what it is. And in truth, none of us quite know. But the other ideas of this redemptive age constitute in our souls going up to this world of souls, then the Messiah coming. We have this resurrection of the dead, and then depending on who you ask, we either live on this earth or our souls go back to God. So they're getting some of those ideas from the Talmud and the latter rabbis for the prayer book. Yeah.
I did have a question. Sure. I had a question that it sounds like there was a lot of focus on what to remove, but was there an equal or some body of literature as to what to maintain? You hinted at it, that they look at the Mishnah to look at the bare bones skeleton of the Amidah and the various prayer services, but were there other ritual discussions of this ritual needs to be kept to preserve our Jewish identity, because otherwise we become completely assimilated?
That's a great question. I don't have any that I brought with me, but certainly they did talk about, if not there, then certainly later on. And just about every sacred thing you'd think about was debated, including, I think a good example is the timing of Shabbat. And what do you think timing of Shabbat should start at, just at sunrise or just after sunrise, whatever. But some said, we're going to have it start on Sunday because our Christian, I'm not joking, they said, because our Christian neighbors have their Sabbath on Sunday and we have ours Friday night, Saturday, it throws off the entire economic system for Jews of, well, we're working, they're in church, and when we're in synagogue, we're losing, it doesn't work out. And so there were some synagogues in America that said, we are going to have our Sabbath on Sunday. And a lot of other people said, no, it must stay, that it must be on Saturday. There's something about this that has to stay. And turns out, we were right about, it really should be on Saturday, but just about every single ritual that you can think of at one point was debated, should we keep it, or in what form should we keep it up? With a lot of things, the question was, did they get rid of chosenness? We'll look at that in just a second. The answer is yes, no, and it depends. And so what a lot of the rabbis here talk about is they're not totally getting rid, even the Reform rabbis are saying we're totally uninterested, unconvinced by this Messianic age. Most of them don't totally get rid of it. They say, well, maybe the Messianic age is the redemption of all humankind. And maybe chosenness, instead of Jews being this one special people that's solely chosen, God's favorite nation, we are chosen for this special task. So a lot of it is done in this reframing, and how it's reframed changes. And I think that's a good transition to looking at how the early Reform prayer books changed over time. Now for this next part, I must apologize because I took photos of prayer books while I was at my parents' basement in Denver over Thanksgiving. I'm not a professional photographer, but the real essence is in the prayer itself. And if you want to follow along to look at the traditional version, we have the page numbers for the Siddur Lev Shalom prayer book. So the first section, if you want to turn to a page, is page 154. 154, I'm pretty sure. So this prayer book, the Union prayer book, circa 1956. So we're jumping ahead about 150 years. Regardless, let's look at first how this prayer book in 1956 deals with the issue of returning to Israel. So we have, sorry, I have to turn to the correct page in my thing. Okay. Thank you, 155. Nope, I was wrong again. I gave you the wrong, sorry, 154. I already messed. So this is the Hebrew section from Ahavav Rabbah, and the part I want to focus is on at the very end. And so what is missing from this very end of Ahavav Rabbah, the care of Tanu? There's no Vahavienu. There's no V'havyenu me arba konfot ha'arch. There's no bring us back from the four corners of the earth. Instead, if you look here, and you can look at the other translation in the Sir Lev Shalem, we trust in thee and rejoice in thy saving power. Thee cometh our help. Thou hast cast us and drawn us into thee. Serve thee in faithfulness. Joyfully do we lift up our voices and proclaim thy unity. Praise thee, O God, who in thy love has cast thy people, Israel, to serve thee. Where's the part about coming back and coming to Israel? It's not there. And so now we'll go to the next section from this prayer book, and now we go to the Giverot, and now we're on page 100 and, I hope I got this correct in the prayer book, page 160. I did get this one correct. Okay, so now we come to the next section about Mechea Metim, reviving the dead, which is a fixture of the Messianic age. And in the Giverot, the second blessing of the Amidah, where we praise God's might for all that God does. We talk about the wonderful things, and one of them is giving life to the dead. So let's look at what it says in the Giverot. Atah gibor le'olam Adonai, Rav l'Hoshia, mechalkel chayim b'chesed, mechayeh hakol b'rachamim rabim. Stuff is different. What does it say? What does it say in the traditional Siddur? Atah gibor le'olam Adonai, mechayeh metim. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, who revives the dead. And instead, in the prayer book from 1956, it doesn't mention that at all. It doesn't mention the revival of the dead at all. And it continues a little bit. So what comes after the Kiddusha? Now we have the 13 blessings in the middle, most of which, not all, but most of which, are somehow about the restoration of Jerusalem, bring our kings back, bring our courts back. So let's see what's after the Kiddusha. We have the prayer for knowledge. We have the prayer for knowledge. We have the prayer for forgive our sins. We have the prayer for heal us, and then Shema Kolenu, hear our voice. So we just skipped over everything. You know, they're not even dealing with the issue of Jerusalem. They're not dealing with the line of David. It's not talking about it. So in these early prayer books of the Reform movement, in these couple sections that we're looking at, they're largely omitted. You know, there's not this intentional change. The next prayer book we'll look at, Gates of Prayer, which is what I first started growing up with, is that wonderful blue book. I actually got a free book today because I went to the library at Beth Israel. No, it's like that big. I mean, you can have the weekday edition, but I went to the library and they just gave me a free book because no one wants them anymore. But anyway, this one's from 1975, and the pages in Siddur Lev Shalem are the same. So let's look back at Ahava Rabbah and let's see if they have the Havienu. Do we have a Havienu? No. It goes, then we shall never be shamed. We shall forever put our trust in you, the great, holy, and awesome one. We will rejoice and be glad in your salvation. For you, God, are the author of many deliverance. You have chosen us and drawn us near to your service and faithfulness and proclaim your unity. Blessed is the Lord who in love has chosen his people to serve him. So it has us bring us close to your name, but nothing about the peoplehood. Let's go on and see how they deal with the Giverot and the Amidah. So here we have the Giverot. Atah gibor le'olam Adonai mechayeh hakol atah Rav l'Hoshia. So instead of mechayeh metim, it's God who gives life to all. Because giving life to all, it doesn't have to be messianic. It can be God who affirms life, God who makes life worth living. And if we look at the latter prayer of the Giverot, we really see that, well, maybe giving life to all really means when you heal the sick, you give life to all. When you free the captive, you give life to all. It's not reviving the dead, it's giving life to all. Same idea, but now acceptable within the logic of the Reform movement. And the Chatimah, the ending line, Brachat Adonai Mechayeh Hakol. We're going to skip over the Amidah for Gates of Prayer because we're going to look at it a little bit later, and it doesn't change too much to Mishkan Tefillah, the current one. But I want to look at something that kind of turns everything on its head, and it goes back to the last essay from Moses Gutman that we talked about, that the threads of Messianism could never really be taken away. So this is from the High Holiday Prayer Book, Gates of Repentance, from 1978, 3 years after Gates of Prayer is released. And this is from the Yizkor service on Yom Kippur, or better yet, the Amidah in the afternoon service just before the Yizkor service on Yom Kippur. Let's look at the Givorot. Ata gibor le'olam Adonai mechaye metim. And the Chatima, Baruch atah Adonai mechaye metim. Blessed are you, God, who gives life to the dead, or revives the dead. Now, of course, in English, it's translated, it's not even translated. They omit the translation and have a poem instead. Praise be the God whose gift is life, whose cleansing rains let parched Ammon flower towards the sun. Of course, has nothing to do with the actual translation. And for the first part, it says, Ata gibor le'olam Adonai, we pray that we might know before whom we stand. Again, they don't actually say in English, God who gives life to the dead. And yet, for those who know, and if you're coming on Yizkor because you're mourning a loved one, a parent, a friend, a relative, and you see Mechaye Metim, God who brings life to the dead, that has a kind of different level of comfort. So in the same vein, in the same series of prayer book, where Reform is saying, we're not going to deal with reviving the dead, but we know that Yizkor is different. We know that people need it sometimes. We know that we can touch on these themes a little bit. That's kind of cool, right? Okay, questions before we move on to Mishkan Tefillah?
Prayer book, your current prayer book says, Hakol, then in parentheses.
We'll look at the current prayer book in just a second. But yet we've seen the transformation, and I skipped over a little bit that I should have made a note on. For the very early prayer books, when it comes to the Givorot, it doesn't even say Mechayeh HaKol. At the very end, you can see the Chatima, Baruch atah Adonai notea betochenu chayei Olam. We sanctify thy name, source of praise be the Lord who has implanted within us eternal life. And so they don't say revive the dead, but has given us life forever, which a little messianic, but not quite revive the living or revive the dead. So let's look at the current prayer book now. Sorry if this, too many slides. Okay. 1978. I don't know. So Mishkan Tefillah, now the prayer book that you'll find in the vast majority of Reformed congregations. Now we come back to Ahavah Rabbah. What do we see? V'haviyenu l'shalom me'arba kanfot ha'aretz. God who has brought us back from the four corners of the earth, and finally we have this tie to Zionism. So what's changed? I mean, when you think about it, what's changed from the start of Reformed Judaism until 2007 when this is published? Not only 1967, the illusion that Jews could be full German citizens, that if we just assimilate, that kind of got blown out of the water. Same with France and everywhere else. And so we let go of the illusion, okay, we're never really going to be French, we're never really going to be German, but we can be American. That takes some time. But still, Israel's this other country, we don't really know what to deal with it. And then you're exactly right. We have the 1967 war, and it's like, oh my God, like this is actually the start of the redemption. And there are Jews in Israel, especially within the National Zionist camp, that with very good reason looked at the recapturing of all of Judea and Samaria, all of the West Bank, and said, if this isn't the start of the Messiah, I don't know what is. And so it got a lot of Jews interested. And so we have, may God bring us from the four corners of the earth to where? To Eretz Israel. Now let's look at the Amidah for Givorot again. And we get a choice this time. And not only do we have the option of saying Mechaye HaKol, you can say Mechaye Metim, but now we have the possible insertion for Mashiva Ruach or Marit HaGashem or Marit HaTal. Please God bring the rains and the winds to Israel, or let the dew fall. And so we've added this back in. And you see it at the end too. Baruch atah Adonai Mechaye HaKol or Mechaye Metim. And so we've seen this evolution in time from the early reformers that saying, we don't want anything to do with mysticism. We are done with it. look where we are now. Look at this evolution and look at this change of how this belief relate, like you can literally see how the Reform movement changed its relation to Olam Habah in the Messianic age. And now we come to, oh, I went backwards. But now we come to the middle parts of the Amidah, where of course we're praying for restoration. And let's see if there's any differences. Tekab shofar gadol lecherutenu, so much. V'sanes gadol l'shukenu v'kol do. It's different. It's different than the, may God sound the shofar and bring us back. May we have this redemption where we're calling all of us back. They put it in nicer language. It's sound the great shofar to proclaim our freedom, raise a great banner for your oppressed, and let the voice of liberty be heard in the four corners of the earth. Blessed are you, Adonai, who redeems the oppressed. And let's look at what that is and Sidor Lev Shalem about what that translation is. So that translation is, I have to get to it. I gotta skip page. Hold on. It is page. I thought it was in the, I was right. Where is, they have the afternoon services here, which I lost. It's page 260 or something. Shacharit. Oh, I'm so sorry. What page for the weekday Amidah? Oh, great, yes, okay. So let's go to page 274. Thank you, Cantor. Okay, so let's look at the difference of Tekab shofar. In the conservative prayer book, sound the great shofar, announcing our freedom, raise the banner, singling the ingathering of the exiles, and bring us together from the four corners of the earth. Baruch atah Adonai, who gathers the dispersed of your people Israel. So particularistic, very universalistic, which still matches what the early reformers said, that we're going to have this pluralistic, this universalistic form of redemption. And we can continue on. For the prayer for our judges, which just looking at the base Hebrew is totally different. For the judges, it's pour out your spirit upon the rulers of all lands. Guide them that they may govern justly. Oh, may you alone rule over us in steadfast love and compassion. Blessed are you, Adonai, who loves righteousness and justice. And in this prayer book, I can't turn the pages. Thank you. Okay, for this one is restore the judges to us as in our early days. So restore the Sanhedrin to us, bring us back. And so we see we don't have to go through all of them. For all of the prayers in the Amidah, it's changed from this particular messianic twist to this universalistic one. And even the prayer for Jerusalem is changed. This is, and turn in compassion your Jerusalem, your city. May there be peace in her gates, quietness in the hearts of her inhabitants. Let your Torah go forth from Zion, and your word from Jerusalem. Blessed is Adonai, who gives peace to Jerusalem. And then the traditional reading, in your mercy, return to your city, Jerusalem. Dwell there as you have promised. So let's build the temple again. Rebuild it permanently, speedily in our day. May you soon establish the throne of David in the midst. Baruch atah Adonai, who rebuilds Jerusalem. So we see these differences. And even though in Mishkan Tefillah, it says, let's just make Jerusalem a city of peace. What does it say in the Passover Haggadah next year in Jerusalem? And what does it say in the Haggadah in Israel? The Shna Habah b'Yerushalayim Habanuyah. Next year in Jerusalem, rebuilt. And so throughout Reform history, the relationship to Olam Habah, the Messianic age, the rebuilding of Israel, the ingathering of the exiles, has gone on a pretty clear trajectory. At once, when tradition and these particular notions were really done away with, in time has become more and more and more particular. And so my guess is that the next Reform prayer book that comes out will be even more traditional than this. And you can look at Israeli Reform Sidurim that are even more traditional. And they look a little bit like an Orthodox door. They're not an Orthodox door, but they look more like it. And I bet that I'm not a betting man, but after October 7th, where a lot of Jews woke up and realized, oh, the great gains that we thought we were making, these communities that we thought we were supporting who have now seemingly ignored us or have now turned their back to the plight of the Jews, I would wager that the next prayer book is even more particularistic than the last one. Thank you for having me over. If you have any questions, please ask, and I hope you learned something.
That was fantastic. So thank you so much. What's fascinating, though, in spite of all of what you're describing with the Messianic age, reincorporating it back into the liturgy, it's fascinating that the Messianism itself was seen as this keter Torah, that this ornament that they did not want to dispose of. And it's fascinating that they found it so important that that was an ornament, and yet most Jews, as you described, whether it's Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, probably don't really want to talk about it anyway. So it's fascinating that they saw it as so important.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're right. It's not even like people don't want to talk about it, but it's like ask the average Jew on the street and really say, like, tell me the order in which the Messianic age is going to come. And it's like, well, we're not really sure. You know, we have our guesses, and so we believe in it. And you're right, it is this thing that we hope for, and it is kind of this keter, it is this kind of crown that we're kind of going toward. And we want to have this redemption, but how it looks like and the forms that it looks like can change, and how we relate to it change. And so it really has been, as the last Rabbi we read thread, it's been this through line.
Thanks. I'm getting the sense that the Reform moved, there was a repurposing of Messianism, because it was an ornament that was, in the beginning, that was consistent with the notion of universal progress. I mean, the Reform movement came into existence basically after the Jews of Europe were essentially freed from ghettos. So there was a sense that mankind would be progressing into this Messianic age, which I think there was one of the old prayer books says that the Jews would lead us into the Messianic age. And then when, history happened and the notion of universal progress was discredited, you had this movement to a more particularistic messianism that was more adaptive to our people across the board, including the Reform movement.
Yeah, and you're right that it kept changing with the times, and Reform Judaism very much, for better or worse, is a product of the time that it's in, and it kept on changing. What also helped to it, as we talked a little bit about, is that the pride in Israel increasingly, people got more connected to Israel, and also different types of people joined the Reform movement. And that was once a Protestant German, phenomena. Now we have more religious Jews from Eastern Europe coming. Now we have an influx of Russian Jews. We have Jews who left Orthodoxy and came to Reform, and Jews who were in Reform who went this way. And like when more diversity came in the Reform movement and different Jewish perspectives, other people said, listen, like, I really like that part. I really like this this emphasis on Olam Habah. Maybe we can bring this in too. And so there was a lot of different factors that helped lead Reform Judaism to where it is today, and probably where it's going in the future.
How is this all impacting Zionism in Reform congregations? Because
How is this law?
because a lot of Reform congregations are pretty split now on Zionism.
I'm sorry, what law?
No law.
I don't know. I think
My accent.
I think it depends on the Reform congregation. Like, I'm lucky to be at Beth Israel, which is like proudly and strongly Zionist, and there are a lot of congregations throughout America that are like proudly and strongly Zionist, and there are other congregations that have more of a, I don't know, a trying relationship with Israel, and yet, like, all of our prayers and just about every one of our holidays, except for Purim and maybe one other, are directly related to the land and people of Israel. And so, like, I think some people might struggle with all these connections to Israel, but I think the vast majority of Jews, or at least the vast majority of Jews that I'm in connection with, especially over this last 2.5 years, have increased their connection with Israel and like have found more pride in it. And I don't know if that totally answers the question.
Pass it to Joyce afterwards. Did they do anything with the Kol Nidre?
That's a great question. So Kol Nidre is a wonderful edit too. So Kol Nidre is the declaration in which the Kol Nidre and Yom Kippur service is named after, basically says, for all vows that we took between man and God, this past year that we didn't mean. So maybe it had to do with, if someone was forced to convert under pressure. Of course, Kol Nidre was written before the Inquisition's fine. And all future vows that we make between man and God are also null and void if we didn't really mean them. And just about every movement, including conservative, including Orthodox, looked at Kol Nidre and said, why do we have to deal with this? So the early reformers said, we're done with Kol Nidre. We don't want to deal with it anymore. So they totally nixed it, 100% nixed from the service. And then the good the good Jews from this Protestant society said, okay, we don't have to have the words, but we missed the tune. And so I'm deadly serious. And so some of the Cantor Feibush at Beth Israel has like a misprint of one of the early Reform Sidors in which Kol Nidre shouldn't have been it, but was in it, and they stopped printing them. They collected it back up. And so we had the tune because the tune is so haunting that, when it comes, August, a month and a half before the high holidays, we're all humming our head, da, na, 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 like, you can't get it out. The tune's like from Sinai. And then once we had the tune, it was like, well, the words are pretty cool too, so let's put the words back. I'm dead serious. And so Kol Nidre is a perfect example of here's something that most Jewish branches agree on at some level has fundamental problems to it. And yet because of the tune, because it's so comforting, because there's just something about it, it's added back in. The service is named after. What other service do we have that's named after a single prayer? That's not even a prayer. Kabbalah at Shabbat's not really a service, and it's just named like the welcoming of Shabbat. But to name a whole service, Kol Nidre, it's pretty cool. Good question. Any other questions?
No, I was just going to say I grew up here, so I remember the original prayer book. And being I don't know if you've had a chance to visit the Beth Israel that is now the Heinlein Theater. It was an exquisite building, absolutely exquisite building. And from Beth Israel has like 300% done it was all English. You didn't wear a kippah, and you sure wouldn't see people in a talit. It was, and Emmanuel was formed because Beth Israel was so anti-Zionist. So our city was truly affected by that.
And you're right, there has been a change, not just at Beth Israel, but all across the country. You go to a lot of Reform synagogues now, and you look to the back of the room, and you go, the common question is, when was the last time the organ was played? I'm dead serious. At Beth Israel, it's played during the high holidays. Granted, I've only been there for a year and a half, so maybe they play it one or other times. But for the most part, you go to an old Reform synagogue, and you go, when was the last time it was played? And someone goes, gosh, it must have been 30 years ago. It must have been 50 years ago. Like, there's been these changes over times from, the aesthetic of we're going to not be unlike our neighbors to we're proud of who we are. We want to be pro-Israel. We want to be particularistic. And when we are particularistic, we want to do it in the vein that makes us comfortable. And so maybe instead of saying we're the chosen people in this way, well, we're chosen for this mission, and that people's chosen for that mission. Totally fine. So it's different ways of embracing the idea. Cool. Okay. Well, if you have any, if you have any other questions, email me. But thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Could you?
I don't know if I'm allowed to with. There's a copyright issue.
Oh.
For copy.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
By the book.
Yes.
By the book.